From the University of Pretoria shows that South Africa can attract tourists of tomorrow by telling stories of today through film. Now, according to Dr Charlene Herselman, new pathways for the tourism and film industry development can diversify the South African tourism product and lead to a dispersed offering with a better geographic spread of economic benefits as well as job creation. Dr. Herselman joins me now in studio for more insights on this. A very good morning to you, Doc, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So maybe let's start off with you just explaining what film tourism is about and how it's evolved in South Africa over time.
Well, basically, film tourism is an easy one to describe because it does exactly what it says.
Yeah.
People will watch a beloved film, television series, or any other kind of video, and they will fall in love with the story. And in an effort to get closer to that story, they will go and visit the place where that production was made, so where it was filmed, because that's really the only way that we can interact with these stories.
Right.
And they then travel to these places, they do a lot of research, they will go and reenact scenes there. It's a very, very diverse sort of tourism. Usually it involves people showing you a picture of what it looked like on screen, and then you have to sort of imagine that in the real setting, because oftentimes they change the sets, they remove them and things like that. And for South Africa, we have had limited experience in terms of film tourism because unfortunately we haven't yet capitalized on it. We are a great filming destination. We have a wonderful local filming industry, and we are a darling of the international filming world because people come here. We have all the landscapes. We're called a world in one country. So we can set any type of story here. We have incredible production crews and infrastructure that makes high quality productions possible.
That's true. And
we also have, you know, a very low production cost here because we do offer tax incentives and a very favorable exchange rate. So we have to actually link our film tourism or our tourism industry a bit better to our film industry. There has been examples. Historically, we're talking about, for example, The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Yes.
Was a cult classic in Japan and drew a lot of Japanese tourists here. We also think about Shaka Zulu in the 1980s, where we have Shaka Land still today. And then much more recent productions where we featured in, for example, Avengers, The Age of Ultron. We haven't really capitalized on those. So we have a long list of starring credits, but we need to now take our visitors there.
So where's the disconnect? I mean, if we've got such a thriving film industry and so many stories to tell and the landscape that we can use to tell these stories and also tourists that are very much willing to come to South Africa, why haven't we connected the two?
I think the problem lies in there are no formalized links between these industries, and that's a global phenomenon. They've actually done a lot of work, for example, in the United Kingdom, where we base a lot of our research on in terms of connecting the two, because the film industry is often very secretive. So they don't really want to necessarily, not in a bad way, but they don't really want to collaborate necessarily with other industries. And in South Africa, the different departments that deal with the film and tourism industries are spread so wide. It's the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, it is Trade, Industry and Competition, and Tourism. And so they really just have to formalize those linkages, I think, in terms of streamlining the process. Right from the get-go, you know, where they come in, they're permitting, they are looking for location scouts. You have to start integrating tourism and seeing if we can, with those tax incentives that we provide, for example, arrange some sort of promotion for South Africa as the setting and the destination in the film.
And could film tourism also just reflect and influence South Africa's cultural identity, especially with some South Africans maybe just moving from one part of the country and wanting to see other parts because of a particular film or TV show?
Absolutely. I think we are seeing a lot more South African stories being told. There is a collaboration, for example, between South African tourism and Netflix called Made in South Africa, where the primary goal is the promotion of South Africa, but also the telling of South African content, which I think is such a good counterpoint if you think about the negative press that South Africa gets, that we get the positive stories out there as well. And Netflix has agreed to invest in our local film industry as well, which is good for growing the film industry. But it's an excellent point you raise, because I think a lot of times people think in terms of film tourism in terms of international productions.
Right.
But South Africa is very popular with Bollywood as well, for example, just a different perspective to the Western Hollywood phenomenon. And there's a lot of scope for developing domestic film tourism, because we have wonderful productions, and it's a wonderful motivation for South Africans to travel. And sometimes film tourism can luckily be very inexpensive, because it does take you to the less popular sites where you will not necessarily find such expensive admission fees and things like that.
Yes.
So it is a wonderful avenue for developing domestic tourism as well.
So maybe let's just expand on the economic benefits. I mean, you spoke about the job creation that could come with it, but maybe also just other industries who, by consequence, would also be able to benefit from film tourism.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about tourism. Tourism is a multiplier effect industry.
Yeah.
It affects hospitality, accommodation, transport, and film tourism by extension is the same. It starts off with the production coming into South Africa, because in essence, they are also visitors themselves. The actors, the crew, they need to stay somewhere, they need to eat something, they need to access infrastructure to make the production possible. So already, you get an influx there, but most sites really are involved for the spin-off benefits afterwards, where you get the film tourism and you get lots of interested tourists coming through who will then obviously also need that same infrastructure. In terms of, I think, diversifying the economy, it's a wonderful opportunity. It provides, for example, tourist guides with the chance to create customized products. Because they can just go out and put together a map and take people, advertise a specific film tour, say, for example, of Cape Town, and that makes them stand out in a very competitive market. And then also, the film industry, while you have the major infrastructure that you need in the major centres like Cape Town, Durban and Johannesburg, a lot of time on-location shooting will happen in more remote areas. And if people want to go and see those areas, they have to go there.
Yeah.
So they will have to go to places like the Northern Cape and the Free State, which hasn't necessarily received the tourism attention that it rightfully deserves.
That's so true. I mean, if you speak to a lot of filmmakers, they'll talk to you about funding being one of the main hindrances in them being able to put out those good stories, and then of course having that positive influence on tourism. How much of funding should we really be looking at in terms of investors and government playing a role in ensuring that filmmakers are able to put their stories out there?
Well, that's the age-old question, isn't it?
Right.
There is always a struggle to access funding in the film industry. But I think as the film industry develops, especially in South Africa in stature, as we're getting our messages, our stories out to the world now, the demand will increase. And that will mean there will be more funding available. There are lots of initiatives. For example, the National Film and Video Foundation specifically has programs that I know support young and up-and-coming storytellers. But that is one of the primary challenges. But I think this is a snowball effect. The more we get out there and the more that people are now consuming South African content on major platforms like Netflix, the more demand there will be. And that will create opportunities. As I've mentioned, Netflix, for example, they do have an investment program where they're also investing in producing South African content.
Yeah. Just out of interest, is there such a thing as over-tourism? I mean, places like Hollywood where everybody wants to go and see and visit because of the movies that we watch, could they experience a little bit of over-tourism?
Yes, over-tourism is a very real thing. Film tourism is actually a very interesting counterpoint to it. What we experience with over-tourism is if a site is visited or a destination is visited so much that the actual quality of life for the tourists, but more importantly, the residents, decrease. And so we've seen those protests happening in Europe, in Dubrovnik, in Barcelona, in Venice, in these sites where you have major mass tourism. And I think oftentimes it's tied to something like cruise tourism, where you have those massive cruise ships coming in. And that's why a lot of destinations are looking at these niche tourisms to diversify their offering so that everyone isn't being drawn to the same place. And film tourism is one that has been identified in terms of a site or a type of tourism that has potential to draw away the mass tourists and to maybe have a better spread of geographic benefits for the tourists.
Lastly, Doc, just are there any research opportunities that exist within the film tourism space, particularly in relation to historical and cultural studies?
Absolutely. I think it's a very under-researched area. We have done some work for the National Department of Tourism, but we would like to start implementing some of those suggestions that we have so that we can start creating those linkages between the film and the tourism industry, and we have a concrete product, a film tourism product. And after that, of course, you will be monitoring the benefits and the impacts to make sure that it doesn't become an over-tourism and it actually disadvantages the places where it is set. So we definitely think it's one of the bigger areas in tourism research at this point, because they expect that film tourism will double its market share over the next 4 years. And that is actually significant growth that needs to be monitored.
Dr. Herselman, thank you so much. Very interesting discussion. I'm sure many filmmakers out there are already thinking of plotting their lines across certain spaces in the landscape of South Africa and ensuring that we get more tourists, especially those from international countries coming to visit us. Thank you so much for your time.